I would like to, in this case, put a big thank you out to the community members that have worked with us over the past almost 2 years on these goals. And those community members included a number of our students from our high schools that participated, and a huge, huge thank you to them. Also, a huge thank you to Supervisors Dan Stork and Penny Gross for serving on the Joint Environmental Task Force with school board members over the years. And a special thanks to our school board member, Karen Corbett Sanders, who worked with Sharon Bulova to have the vision to start the Joint Environmental Task Force in April of 2019. Thank you, Karen. And thanks too to previous board members, Pat Hines and Dahlia Palchik, for their early leadership to form the community group and to get going. We have made progress working on these goals for over 1 year with significant community input. In October 2020, this board voted to allow staff to collaborate with county staff to evaluate and develop a plan for moving forward with these goals. Today, we will hear where staff is with this work. FCPS and Fairfax County are on the forefront of thinking about environmental stewardship. We submitted some information to the Virginia School Board Association to do a short presentation on this effort at their July conference. When they saw what we were doing, they reached out and asked for not just a short presentation, but a 1-hour webinar. So both Mr. Frisch and I and Mr. Plattenberg participated in that on just this month, June 8th. One unique aspect of this work that I'd like to point out is the countywide collaboration, and for FCPS, the cross-departmental work that is happening. Our ISD and Get to Green staff is working with our energy and our design and construction staff to jointly provide opportunities for our students to be engaged. And I'm, of course, super excited about that because that was one of the main tenets of our Get to Green programming from the very beginning. We have a few new people at our JET table and working with our team that I just want to mention today. Brady Rausch is our new FCPS Sustainability Coordinator, and Heather Dietz is new in Design and Construction as an Assistant Director. And they have both been instrumental in helping us work on moving these goals forward. Today, we are here to bring the board and the community up to date on work that has been done with county staff since the fall. We will vote at our July meeting on what our next steps will be in this work, accepting these goals, regular monitoring of progress, and perhaps developing updates to our environmental stewardship policy 8425. We'll make a decision on that or just talk about that today. So today is informational. Although it is tempting, and I certainly am one that could talk about this for hours, today we don't want to get into all of the technical aspects of how these goals will be implemented. We do have some significant reports. Some of them are on board docs. We have a big net zero report that was produced earlier this year that outline a lot of those, the nitty-gritty details of how we might actually implement this. Our conversation today should center around where we are headed, and how we are coordinating with the county overall. The goals you will hear about today are aspirational. They are a stretch perhaps, and will take a concerted effort across the county to achieve them. I think what you'll hear today, though, is that staff is really excited to work toward this. With uncertainties around changing and enhancing technologies, state and federal legislation of funding, budgetary constraints, partnership opportunities, et cetera, just when these goals may be obtained may be uncertain. And some of the goals we may even achieve earlier than what we talk about today. The goals are worthy, and we will monitor our progress toward them regularly as FCPS works hand in hand with county staff, the Board of Supervisors, and the community. So with that introduction, I will turn it over to staff, and then we will follow our usual work session protocols where we have each board member have 3 minutes for questions and comments, and we'll move forward with that. So Mr. Plattenberg, if you would like to start us off with the presentation, we're happy to move on.
Thank you, Ms. Tolan, and thank you, Mr. Frisch, and all the members of the board, and also Dr. Braybrand for giving us the opportunity really to talk about the Joint Environmental Task Force. So really, what is it? So as we advance through these slides, I'll try to be brief because I'm sure you're going to have lots of questions that we're going to be getting to. The first slide really talks about having a look at what the school board has been asking us to do all across the division through budgetary process, through program implementation. And it really is talking about bringing all the right voices into the room. The JET, as you heard from Ms. Tolan, was established in April of 2019, and it was established by the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors and the Fairfax County School Board. And the mission was for us to join the political and administrative capabilities of the county and the school system to proactively address climate change, environmental sustainability. In the spring and summer of 2019, the JET Executive Committee solicited community members to round out the membership, drafted the mission statement, and developed focus areas. The JET's composed of 13 members from the Board of Supervisors and the school board and the community at large. As was mentioned by Ms. Tolan, the executive board consists of Supervisor Dan Stork, Supervisor Penny Gross, School Board Member Elaine Tolan, and School Board Member Carl Frisch. Task force members include Richard Aiken, Karen Camblin, Richard Clayton, Meg Mall, Susan Stillman, Smita Chandra Thomas, Greg Ulsis, and task force student members include Winnie Gao and Ara Kim. Well, the next slide really talks about what it is on our implementation priorities, that they shall be implemented, as it says, through the One Fairfax lens. And recognizing the importance of environmental justice, all county and school initiatives undertaken as a result of these recommendations shall be implemented through that One Fairfax lens with a prioritization on equity. So as I said, the next slide really is our mission. And the mission of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors School Board Joint Environmental Task Force, or JET, is to join the political administrative capabilities of the county and the school system to proactively and equitably address climate change and environmental sustainability. The JET will include community partners from higher education, industry, community, and student advocacy groups to recommend aggressive goals in areas of common county and school operations and influence, such as workforce development, infrastructure and sustainability of public facilities and transportation, land use planning, communication and community engagement, and other challenges and opportunities as they arise. The JET will provide a forum for informing, advising, collaborating, and addressing countywide issues and aligning institutional policies and practices pertaining to climate change and environmental sustainability through the lens of the One Fairfax and to appointing bodies. So the area of focuses are identified on the next slide. And really, the area of focuses, include energy, transportation, waste management, recycling, and workforce development. Those are the 4 overarching focus areas, and they were chosen of priority focus by subcommittees which were formed to work with staff to understand existing practices and policies and to draft recommendations. The next slide, we talk about establishing the goals. After we identify the areas of focus, we establish the goals. In the case of energy, the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, the Fairfax County Park Authority, the Fairfax County Regional Housing Authority, and the Fairfax County School Board should commit to being energy carbon neutral by 2040. In the areas of solid waste and recycling, the Fairfax County Government Schools should set an aspirational goal to be at zero waste by 2030. In the area of workforce, the Fairfax County Government and schools should provide additional resources for students and adult learners to know about and pursue green career paths. And in the area of transportation, they have Fairfax County Connector bus fleet transition to electric or other non-carbon emitting alternatives by 2030, and the Fairfax County Public Schools bus fleet by 2035, and all non-bus fleet vehicles that have electric alternatives should be transitioned by 2035. This was recently modified by the Board of Supervisors, and we'll get into that a little bit more in just a bit. In regard to the energy goals on the next slide, as we mentioned, the carbon neutrality, the JET recommends as an overarching goal that the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, the Fairfax County Park Authority, the Fairfax County Regional Housing Authority, and the Fairfax County School Board commit to being energy carbon neutral by 2040. Now, carbon neutral is an overarching goal. So it covers many areas that will require multiple actions and responses across FCPS as an organization, and really across the county as a whole. Carbon emissions. to achieve 50% emissions reductions by 2030 as compared to the 2019 baseline. And we've been talking about that baseline in some of our reviews, but that was the goal that was agreed upon. A greenhouse gas emissions inventory is something that we've done in Fairfax County Public Schools since 2008. And in that time, we've experienced a gross reduction over 30%, which is massive. It's best in class. And I would submit to you that no other school division at the scale of Fairfax County Public Schools, with the growth that we've endured during that period of time, has had a similar reduction in the greenhouse gas emissions and the greenhouse gas footprint. Clean renewable energy produced 25% of the county energy use from in-county renewable energy generation by 2030 and 50% by 2040, using the 2019 energy base as the baseline. Number 4, building energy performance standards for existing buildings to decrease the total energy usage for all county facilities by 25% by 2030 and 50% by 2040 as compared to the 2019 baseline. Since 2014, the baseline year used in Better Buildings Challenge, Fairfax County Public Schools has exceeded our goal of 20% reduction in energy use. Number 5, the net zero commitment. All new county buildings and major renovation projects beginning planning and design in 2021 and after must achieve net zero energy performance, or NZE, as defined by below, unless the county staff advises that the board prior to the 30% design phase why that project cannot meet the NZE standard. And we did that because we have a number of aging facilities that may or may not be able to achieve that. And we want to be realistic in that goal. The next energy goal is transportation goals. And the transportation goal, when we talk about bus and fleet replacement, as we'll go ahead and talk about bus and fleet replacement, the JET recommends that the Fairfax County Connector and diesel bus fleet be transitioned to electric alternatives by 2030, and the FCPS fleet by 2035. Appropriate benchmarks will be determined to help measure progress toward achieving these goals, determine which vehicles have electric or other non-carbon emitting alternatives, and transition them by 2035, and to develop a plan for mitigating the carbon footprint of others. Appropriate benchmarks will be determined to help measure progress towards achieving these goals. Number 2 on this slide is the charging infrastructure. Necessary charging infrastructure will be installed to scale as a fleet grows. Wherever possible, charging infrastructure will serve FCPS and the county. Number 3 is clean fuel. To develop a plan to fuel these electric vehicles using non-carbon emitting fuels and carbon offsets with a complete transition to 100% clean fuel by 2030. And number 4, improving options and programs for safe biking and walking. The forthcoming Active Fairfax plan should prioritize increasing safe, well-designed, ADA compliant, and interconnected, including with mass transit options for biking, walking, and running. Expand and promote programs that incentivize biking and walking to school and work. Ensure adequate bike racks at schools and transportation hubs. Hold countywide events promoting trail systems, including bike rides, walks, etc. Then the last one is grant opportunities. For us to apply for grant funding for electric buses and the affiliated charging stations wherever possible. Now, FCPS is not a lead agency in all of these, and several JET transportation recommendations. The lead agencies would be the Fairfax County Department of Transportation, for example, the Virginia Department of Transportation, and the Fairfax County Park Authority. And this is what's so amazing about the overall JET. It takes all of us. As we say, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes all of us when we talk about these JET goals. So the next slide, we'll talk about zero waste. The JET recommends that the Fairfax County government and schools set an aspirational goal to be at zero waste by 2030. A plan for achieving zero waste by 2030 must be prepared by staff by the end of the second quarter of current year 2021. And the plan would be prepared for staff and should include staff ideas, possibly via a preliminary survey, about how to reduce the amount of waste in their offices and classrooms. Incentives should be considered for the best ideas. Number 2, trash and recycling audit. FCPS is not a lead agency under goal number 2 because of who provides the refuse and recycling through the county. It's done by the county. The audit should be planned and implemented to get a better idea as to how and what residents and businesses are throwing away and or recycling. And an audit would examine representative samples, for example, 200 pounds of trash and recycling, with several staff dedicated to sorting and examining over a period of several days to get better data. In the time of COVID-19, a trash audit obviously would require many more limitations and stipulations, but as we progress out of that, such things as Tyvek suits, et cetera, may not be necessary. But it points out that there may be additional budgetary and requirements to deal with the health component in addition to the solid waste sample survey that staff may be requesting. Procurement, number 3, the county government and schools should undertake a review of purchasing, what's being ordered and what's being used. And I can tell you, we've already started doing that, especially paper supplies and other items that can be recycled, and develop a sustainable purchasing program to include recycled content paper and plastics and elimination of single-use plastics. Of particular concern now is really the number of electronic devices, laptops, cell phones, and other electronic peripherals that are needed for teleworking and really the modern way for us to provide any type of distance learning and so forth, and our implementation of the advancement of more technology. Although many devices still have value in the current market after the hard drive is wiped, e-waste must be considered and addressed. Number 4, composting. Composting is a simple, effective, environmental friendly activity that should be a significant part of any zero waste plan. County government and schools should encourage expanded composting in both public and private venues, and should undertake a strong educational program in multiple language about waste and recycling for the general public. Number 5, schools recycling. These recommendations focus on schools and really most likely would need to be delayed until we get back to the in-person classes. But to find an advocate for recycling and reduction in each school, expand and continue our amazing school partnership with the Green Flag Program and of the Natural Wildlife Federation, to seek and expand our business partnerships and find a model for sharing school supplies. On the next slide, we'll talk about the workforce development goals. On the first one, we talk about the Green Career Toolkit. The JET recommends that Fairfax County Public Schools counselors and Career Center staff be equipped with a standardized toolkit for talking with students about the range of green careers and the background necessary to enter those careers, to ensure the presence of green career professionals in career days and also on student interview days. Item number 2 is solar job opportunities. Work with local solar installers to investigate job opportunities for new high school graduates, those with a 2-year degree, and those graduating with Fairfax County job programs. Determine what training is needed for job entry and how jobs can be advertised to the potential employees. We have a major solar program underway, but having this conversation beforehand and a result of these JET goals in the committee would have given us the opportunity to build in that procurement such things as possible job exploration opportunities with the vendors responding. That's the type of comprehensive approach that were outcroppings from the JET committee goals and the criteria. Number 3, the green career programs. Develop a comprehensive plan to offer one or more green career economy related programs for high school students to encourage participation in this emerging job market. Opportunities could include specialized training or certificate programs, job shadowing, internships, and real world workforce experience in fields such as electronic vehicle maintenance, solar panel installation, LEED Green Associate certification, sustainable landscaping, and much more. This can be done as a model to an existing course, an after-school program, curriculum submitted as appropriate in an existing course or program or a new course or any other ideas that may come up. Number 4 is utilizing buildings as learning tools. We've been talking about this for quite some time in facilities, and we definitely have opportunities there to develop a plan to utilize county buildings and schools as learning tools. As solar panels are installed or net zero building practices are utilized, and the county continues its use of sustainable building and architecture, is really to utilize those as learning tools to ensure building occupants have the opportunities to learn about all of the building's sustainable features through educational tools such as signage, dashboards, and interactive models. So what we do is those were the different goals that were provided. And then we transition to, okay, the next slide about how do we conceptualize take that into the operationalizing of all of these concepts. And we identify where we are and the considerations after the committee work where I think the real work begins. It was amazing bringing the groups together, the diversity of input, the voices that were raised up in those meetings and the ideas that created these goals. But to operationalize it is really getting on to how do we make this really work in the workplace? And it takes taking this planning, working with the budgeting in the phased approaches, and then tracking our process and doing that 360 review. As was mentioned, there are going to be reports that will be committed and provided as an ongoing portion of the operation of the actual JET committee work, because it doesn't end with just the goals being established. What happens and what we've done is when we were looking at the purchase of our buses, we went ahead and stopped that procurement. And we worked with the county to say, look, if we're going to go ahead and make this purchase that we do annually, we have to look at what that would involve. Do we have the ability to start the conversion to the electric buses immediately? And what we found is that we don't have the infrastructure in place, but it's the type of working together, getting the voices in the room. So we actually stop, we look at the landscape, we look at the procurement, we see when, and a formal commitment on when we can actually go ahead and move forward with phasing in our electric fleet. Because if we buy buses now and we take a look at 2021 and what the goal was as to when we were going to go ahead and have the fleet phased out, when you looked at the average age of a bus is 12 years and beyond, 2021 and 12 years long is 2033. So when we were talking about phasing in all of our bus fleet to be electric by 2034, 2035, when you're looking at that time frame, if you don't begin now, you won't get there. So begin with the end in mind, as Covey says, and really bringing everybody into the conversation. So what we found is we were still in our infancy, but having this conversation at this point, we've not only gone out and had, I call them field trips, where we've gone to Montgomery County, where they developed a business plan that we're looking at very seriously and have analyzed. We've looked at their business plan as to how to take a look at all their operational costs and their lease costs and their maintenance costs. And they've invested that in their fuel costs into what the total cost would be for them to convert their entire fleet of buses to electric buses. Well, they had a leasing agent that came in that provided them what they felt was a very good financial opportunity. And for the same cost of all of those total cost of ownership components, the fuel, the maintenance, and the actual bus costs themselves, they could go ahead and lease their fleet with converting it over a period of time, which is exactly aligned with our JET goal. In addition to going over and visiting with them and talking to them and getting copies of their RFP and looking at how that would best be approached here in Fairfax County, we've also had conversations where we've gone ahead and brought other lending agencies to come in and take a look at our fleet, to take a look at the infrastructure that we've had put in place in our partnership with Dominion for the 8 electrical buses, and to see where we can expand those programs. We have a draft of as was mentioned, apply for individual grants. We've taken a look at that draft. Unfortunately, that initial grant application that we've done a lot of work to get prepared, it requires a significant capital outlay that really doesn't seem to be cost effective right now, because we as a school system would have to pay in addition for the installation of the charging stations. And the way this grant was phrased, it is that we'd have to pay half of the total cost of the electric fleet. However, looking at those options, looking at those possibilities exactly is what I'm talking about when we talk about operationalizing. There are many more examples. Our solar initiative is just one other example. I'm remiss that I wish we had had the JET committee work done before. We partnered with the county. It was their procurement actually, but before the county and schools and park authority got together on that solar RFI and RFP, and went ahead and included the learning component of that, because that would have aligned with what you have heard in this presentation. So really the last slide that I get to is when we talk about dreaming of a better future, right? We have two ways to go. And Mr. Frisch was really good about saying that. We can go a clean way or we can go a dirty way. And the reality is the school board and board of supervisors may be two separate entities and have many different responsibilities, but we both have the common thread and our common interest in the environment. It's going to require collaboration on all sides, the park authority, the schools, BDOT, the county and school board working together to make this positive impact in our environment. And the JET is going to continue to provide a forum for informing, advising, collaborating, and addressing countywide issues and aligning institutional policies and practices pertaining to climate change and environmental sustainability through the lens of One Fairfax and the appointing bodies. So I'd like to conclude by saying thank you for giving me the opportunity to present. Again, I'd like to recognize Ms. Tolan and Mr. Frisch for their excellent work, and the rest of the committee members that are all here present today, Mr. Smith and Dr. Bergman for their support, because this, although we do have some significant aspirational goals, if we don't begin working on those, we will never achieve them. And this sets the undergirding framework for us to actually get to those achievements. So thank you, Ms. Tolan.
So thank you, Mr. Plattenberg, for the thorough presentation. You actually left a number of staff people off the hook. They were planning to talk through the various goals, but we're super fortunate to have several staff people here with us today. I'll mention their names and the particular goal areas that they're working on. But let me just mention first for board members and for the public, on board docs, we have listed, there's a list of all of the recommendations. There was a lot that Mr. Plattenberg just went through. There's also a something called comparison charts that staff did a really great job of putting together that lists the main goals, a few details of the recommendation, and if there's any difference between what the Board of Supervisors and FCPS is doing, and then different factors that we need to kind of keep in consideration moving into the future dealing with these particular goals. So on the set of energy goals, we are super fortunate to have John Lord, who is our FCPS Energy Manager, here with us today that can give us additional information or talk us through, any questions that anybody has around our energy goals. We also have Allison Coolhane is here. She is our Get to Green coordinator, works in facilities and maintenance in that coordination work. Joey Welburn is here with us from transportation and can help us get into any details there. And we also have Matt Bechtel and Rachel Dahmer from our CTE department to talk to us about the areas of workforce development. So a huge thank you to everyone for being with us here today. So I think with that, we will go into board questions. And I would like staff, if you're answering questions in your particular area, if there's points of clarification or things that you would like to add in addition to the presentation, please feel free to do that because I know you've done lots and lots of work over the last several months. So with that.
Just a point of order.
Yes.
Point of order, Ms. Tolan. You had this great chart. Is this what you want us to address in our comments? Because you have a lot of recommendations here that you want feedback on. Is that where you want to focus our conversation today?
So I think the chart is a good place. It's a good working tool for the board to use. That's kind of what we were thinking about when we put it together. So these are the key recommendations out of JET, and the factors may be something you want to get clarification on or ask questions about it. Yeah, so it's really a working document. And I see your hand is up. Oh, for that question.
That was my question. I'll wait before I actually provide comments.
All right, thank you. So Ms. Marin, would you like to start us off?
Yes, sure. Thank you. I've been looking forward to this for weeks, if not my entire time on the board. So thank you for all that have contributed. The chart is really helpful. I think, as budget chair, I'm always thinking, what's the budgetary implication? What's the reality here? And I think as we go into the fall and do our initial board 2x2s on priorities for budgeting, I think it would be helpful to understand what's the low-hanging fruit here and what can be done. And, could we actually make a plan for how to tackle this in the next, short term and long term of years? I just want to share some thoughts about a few items for my colleagues more so. Yesterday I went to the house that was built by the program, the applied technology education program. So I'm very much in the mindset of career tech, the green jobs. I think when I look at the JET materials, talking about an academy for green jobs, I'm really eager for later on in the conversation this evening. We have some updates from our career tech committee, Untitled and adult community ed, because this all ties together. And we certainly shouldn't be doing different strands here of how we approach career tech. And what I see from the CTAC report is we have academies in certain places and it doesn't seem like we have them anywhere else. And we've heard our students at public hearings, when we had the CIP public hearing, talking about that they want green job experience. So how can we get beyond an academy model that is place-based to something that really gets to more schools at middle and high? So that's one of my big things. Recycling, I have to say, having helped students paint trash cans and dump out trash and sort it myself with them, my new mantra is reject, reduce, and reuse. I think the time for recycling, I'd like to not have that be so prominent because the data show that it's not happening. It's hard. It's a lot of active time. So what can we really do to take some of that energy and reintroduce this or introduce the idea of reject, reduce, reuse? The notion about increasing transportation and porta potties, I'd love to tie this into a need in our communities to put in bathrooms on our sports facility fields. How can we do two things with one action? I think that's a great place. And also, thinking about behavior like student parking. What's the data on how our students are using the parking? Are they really using it because they need to get somewhere after, like a job or some other commitment? Or is it more of a luxury? I don't have any understanding of that. So, but I love this county partnership that we've got going. Let's maximize it and let's put dollars where it's going to produce action. So I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks.
Ms. Corbett-Sanders.
Couple things. One, I would love to hear from both you and Mr. Frisch your vision of the JET of the future and where it goes from here, because the initial framework was really, it hasn't been modified a whole lot. And I know that we've got two great brains on this committee and we've got two great brains from the Board of Supervisors. So it'd be helpful to hear your vision of the future. The second thing is regarding some of your recommendations here, would like to have a better understanding of what you're thinking about in updating policy 8542, because I think that there's always room for improvement on all that stuff. The contract issues, very interested in. I would like us to look at more than just solar and look at just all sorts of renewable and sustainable energy, including perhaps wind. And then cost estimates in the various areas. I think Mr. Plattenberg gave us a great, some expectations there. I do have a question regarding the parking and whether or not we should be looking at a more extensive rollout of parking of solar canopies in all of our parking lots, because I think that that is a big area. But I do worry when we talk about charging a different fee structure for students that have a hybrid or electric car because of the equity piece of that. Those are always more expensive cars. Based on the technology that has been deployed in them. And so when we have a bifurcated pricing system, then we may be inadvertently charging students that have the least ability to pay more, but they'll have to pay more. I would also like to hear a bit more about impact on the current policies and regulations affecting apprenticeship programs and journeyman programs, because we know that many of them have an 18-year-old requirement and our students exit our school system at 18. And so as part of that green careers, it would be helpful to have some input from the JET on what we need to do in our legislative program to create more opportunities for our students so that they can take advantage of them, as well as partnering with the Chamber of Commerce on how we can have a more a constant flow of information on how the jobs in this sector are changing and what the demand for those jobs are. So that's just a few comments that I have. I really appreciate all that you're doing. And I think that the timing of this is perfect, given that we're going to be talking about CTE next.
Okay, so a long list of questions there in that 3-minute time frame. Mr. Frisch, do you want to start out talking about the vision?
Sure. Two things to respond to. One, I have little doubt that there will be developments in the issue areas that JET has worked on over the last 2 years that will necessitate perhaps the county and the school division thinking through, in conjunction with the community, how we might approach future issues. Additionally, the early JET conversations included other issues that were not tackled in these recommendations, like land use. So, there's probably room for picking up other issues as well to go through the same kind of work that JET did on these 4 broad issue areas. So I would say that on what's the future vision of JET.
So it's a going concern.
Yeah, I would think so. In terms of 8542, the policy, it sticks mostly to energy usage. And as you can see from the JET's recommendations, are far more expansive than simply just energy usage. So not putting the recommendations in the policy, because obviously we want flexibility to achieve those goals and grow those goals, but putting similar language about, like we have for energy usage, around transportation, waste and rejection. Thank you, Ms. Marin, and other topics that JET has recommended goals on, I think is the appropriate approach. It puts the board, the weight of the board's policymaking behind the objectives and the intent of JET.
A framework document.
Right, more of a comprehensive framework, I think, than what we have now. We're doing so much more in the area of environmental stewardship than what this policy currently deals with, that I think we want to try to just update it and make it a little bit more all-encompassing with what we're doing. I also see a role for the JET group, maybe, over the next couple of years, even in monitoring, where we are, what kind of progress are we making? What are the new technologies? What are the new opportunities that we have available to us? How are we incorporating those? What is staff working on? Just in pulling that, community group in to, give us feedback and understanding and more information on all of these topics as we're moving forward, just to kind of, keep us in check as we're monitoring all of this. So I think that's all part of it. I would love to call on maybe Matt and Rachel to talk a little bit about maybe even some of the comments that Ms. Marin had, and then the questions that Karen Corbett-Sanders had around apprenticeships. They've done some really great work, or beginning work on how do we even determine what jobs are important. So I'm going to let Matt and Rachel maybe jump on and talk about the work they've been doing.
Thank you, Ms. Tolan. I can handle the apprenticeship question that was asked. So what we're doing with the workforce development program to support the apprenticeships is we're going to be looking at our youth registered apprenticeship program that's available to high school students ages 16 and over. So we're hoping that we can connect with some of the solar installers, or, as was mentioned before, bringing in additional contractors to support any efforts we might have in getting them to be through a partnership with DOLE, Department of Labor and Industry, so that we have a pathway for some of our students in some of our trades and industrial courses, as well as some of our technology and engineering courses, to have a pathway to specific jobs while they're still in high school. And then also, if there are opportunities for students that graduate from FCPS to move on to these different careers, that we'll be able to advertise those as well. So we would definitely need to work with the Department of Labor and Industry to kind of work on some of those things that were mentioned earlier, as well as like, age requirements and things like that. But there is a great youth registered apprenticeship program that starts students early off in the junior and senior year to, gain some work experience paired with the academic content that is being covered in some of those CTE courses, as well as some science courses. And then ultimately, any of those experiences can then transfer on to what we call a registered apprenticeship program that we can connect to into the future. So we have some big goals as far as what we can do there, but legislation needs to change in certain areas. And we definitely want to keep ahead of that. And on our end in CTE and the Greater Office of Counseling, College and Career Readiness, we're doing what we can to stay on the front end and working with the Commonwealth, or I'm sorry, the Northern Virginia Chamber of Commerce, any other workforce development committees that are available to us, and seeing what new trends are available and what things will be changing in the future so that we can start to act on some of these goals that we have. And also, I will mention that we're also exploring, I guess you would say, non-traditional paths for some of our students in the high school grades. So juniors and seniors, instead of, if there are opportunities if there's not opportunities for students to get into some of these specialized CT courses and the skilled trades, we will be looking to, and it was mentioned earlier, our adult community education programs through ACE. We've done a lot in the last year to really promote some of their apprenticeship type programs, where students can ultimately, we can look at scholarship opportunities where we can cover the costs for students that could enroll into those programs after the traditional school day, so that they can get involved into these programs, because that's one thing that is typically an oversight in education, where the kids need opportunities to work, and if there's not available opportunities within the school day, you're taking away opportunities outside of the school day, where those would be, in some cases, opportunities where these students are working to support their families or to and we don't want that. So we want to make sure that we're equitable with the opportunities that we provide. So, anything we can do to support that in the future is what we're going to try to do.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Rachel, Domran, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the work that you're doing, to even determine if we would have a new CTE course, a new unit, some of that work? Rachel, we can't hear you if you're talking.
Ms. Tolan, if we can come back to Rachel and perhaps she can also address whether some of these are dual enrollment, that'd be great.
Oh, can you guys hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Oh, there we go. I apologize. I just got a brand new computer today. So this is the first time I'm using the mic. So right off the bat, I'm happy to answer that for the dual enrollment opportunities, we need to make sure that we're partnering with like Nova Community College. And to my knowledge, I'm not aware of any green or sustainable energy, renewable technology courses at this time, but it's definitely something that I can add to the list of things that we're doing for this summer. So what I was trying to say before I was trying to get my mic situated. So, we want to be really intentional with the courses that we're offering in the course offerings, because we don't just want to keep piling on courses. We want to make sure that, again, we're being very intentional. So what we're going to do this summer is we're going to reinitiate a needs assessment for new course offerings through the technology and engineering program, which is within the CTE program. What this is going to allow us to do is to look at updated information and compare it to the last time we did this assessment on green careers, and that was about 5 years ago. What the needs assessment is going to include is looking at the labor market and employment data for our immediate and surrounding areas, and what the anticipated 10-year job projection is going to look like. If the data shows significant demand and growth, along with interest from student surveys, we can definitely look to possibly replace our electronics pathway courses with courses in the renewable and sustainable energy area. If there isn't a large and immediate job demand or interest from the students, what we're going to do is we're going to look to start work this summer to embed content and concepts from the renewable energy and sustainable energy courses into the existing STEM energy pathway, which is offered at every single high school. And it's a very popular course offering for our students. So this summer, we will also begin discussions around the possibility of creating an independent study course framework, which is something that Matt is familiar with doing. And that would allow for additional internship opportunities for students who are directly interested in green careers. And lastly, we're open to collaborating with the science department and any of their earth science courses that they have to work on integrated activities, and also supporting any after school programs that align with the renewable and sustainable energy courses.
Great, thank you, Rachel. Karen, does that take care of your questions?
Most of them. The next piece was the equity piece on parking fees and whether or not we're looking at solar canopies for all of our parking lots.
Yeah, so John, go ahead, Mr. Platenberg.
Yeah, I can really address that. The parking fee equity is the budget question that I believe has been asked of finance. I don't know exactly where they are on that. And in regards to parking lot canopies, with the transition with the solar, that will be more of a viable option with the vendor that we are going to be navigating to. But before we do that, I do want to fully bring some markups of what that may look like. One of the fears and concerns is just to make sure that everybody is aware, and that if we, principal input and so on, and community input, and also the board, if we're going to move in that direction, to take a look at whether or not that's going to create any administrative issues for parking in the morning, or if it's just going to be like a bus duty or something. We want to make sure we have a full conversation about that before we implement it, because we didn't, as staff, I'm rather bullish on that stuff, but I felt remiss that I didn't bring it before the full board to get feedback, and also the cabinet through the superintendent. But yeah, we're definitely going to explore all opportunities. John, I didn't know if there was anything else you wanted to add, and I apologize for interrupting.
No, that's fine. That's a great answer. I think that canopies should be an option that's available, and we can look more closely at it moving forward.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone. Ms. Cowan.
Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting too. I had a few questions. This is awesome. Thank you guys so much for being here and doing all of this hard work. I know it was really exciting to get to see Elaine and Carl presenting and kind of representing Fairfax, and is a really great indication that I know we're sort of on the leading edge of this, which doesn't mean we can't be doing better. I definitely am super excited about some of the recommendations that are coming forward, but it is also good to know that we're helping create some of this work as well. One of the conversations, I guess, since we just talked about canopies, I just wanted to quickly go back to solar. Can you just explain for us the return, though, on the canopies is not quite as good as roof installations? Is that right? Or am I wrong and canopies is better than roof? Will you enlighten us a little bit there?
Yeah, well, the difference is really, it's all about the solar panel. So, and the amount of space that you have where you can have solar gain. So when you have solar gain exposure, the square footage that we have on our properties, if you take a look at the roof and the ability to go ahead and really collect more solar emission and raise, that's why there's people talking about the different comparisons. So, when you talk about solar, bottom line is it's a solar farm. If you look at the solar farm, wherever you can put, the more panels you can put, the more gain you can achieve, notwithstanding things you have to take into account, such as natural obstructions, tree canopies that might impede the solar rays, and anything that you might, intuitively, contemplate. But it really is just about the square footage area that you can provide for those farms.
And to that end, when we look in the fall towards our legislative packet, are there further recommendations then that you have? I know we've kind of been, as a Commonwealth, moving a little more and more, trying to push Dominion and other users about the percentage of power that we can use and then keep for ourselves and what we have to bring back. And there was some change with what had to be contingent use versus being able to supply more of a grid. Are there more pieces that we need to do at the state level with our delegates and senators to make this even better for our schools?
Well, I would always say there's always opportunity there, and working with Michael Malloy in terms of the platform and what we might want to present. There are opportunities that can be made. The biggest issue is you've got this convergence, as Mr. Frisch was alluding to, where the legislative issues of today may not be the ones of tomorrow. So it is, yes, those are components that are very important about how much electrical generation you can do as a system on a type of grid and how much you can give back or give to yourself to offset your costs. In addition, the technology advances. You know, I mentioned solar farms, but I anticipate the solar collection panels in terms of their scale and scope and their capacity, to become much like computers were before laptops and before your iPhone or the phones that we have today. And I think the storage and distribution are going to be areas for expansion and opportunity. You know, they do it in areas like California, and they do it because they get incentivized. They get incentivized because the state will give credits or investment opportunities for investment into more solar expansion. I think that's a huge opportunity for us legislatively to see more partnering with not only utility companies, because they've been great as a part of that electric bus program that we were hoping would get more legislation on, but we did not. But yeah, there's certainly more opportunities, and we'd be happy to work with Michael Malloy to be that conduit.
And anything down the pike when we're talking about our new electric buses? I know they haven't had quite as much use this year as we would hope that they would in a normal year. Are there further opportunities that you see with companies like Dominion to potentially expand that programming? Do you all hear anything about that?
No, the only thing I heard was that Dominion was a little disappointed that they didn't get the legislative support. There were so many things going on with COVID that, you know, this past legislative session was kind of a bust in that regard from what I've heard from them. However, the elements that I mentioned about leasing agencies, in fact, the leasing agency that's working with Montgomery County was a former solar leasing company, and they see that as a huge market. So I can't help but think that the price points will come down. And if you think about it, the same thing happened back in the 80s when we talked about Fairfax County Public Schools in 85 used to just purchase outright the educational cottages or trailers or temporary buildings, whatever you want to call them. And leasing agencies identified a way that you could lease them very cost effectively to do a lease purchase. So I think those leasing companies looking at different ways to finance, to invest those long-term costs, while the technology costs start coming down, will all come at a convergence where we're going to see a lot of gains.
So that kind of addresses, I was going to ask if you think PPAs are still the way that we're going to wind up going, but that kind of speaks to that question. My next one then is about our schools that are in planning. I know when we were in FPAC a few months ago, Justin mentioned that Mason Crest is potentially an opportunity for us to go net zero at that building. But that was really kind of the only one of things that have been renovated recently that kind of wouldn't be like a huge cost expenditure to make it, that you all had done things to get us in a good place to be ready there. For the schools that are in planning, are in the planning phase, are we looking to a more net zero component for those schools?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because the report that was referenced by Ms. Toll at the beginning that we have on our website is really our net zero energy report that we've done. We commissioned an engineering firm to take a look at, and they used some samples. I think it was 2 elementary schools, if Mr. Frisch had clarified with me once before. And yet, when they took a look at that, they looked at renovation of existing schools to become net zero. So yes, but beginning in the 2021 bond, we're including that in the design to be a part of the design for all of our projects to identify to be net zero or net zero ready. There may be, as was mentioned in my presentation, some cost considerations or physical considerations that may make it financially disadvantageous, both short and long term, that we may not want to go ahead and look down the road. But for the most part, the whole plan is that all of the projects within the within the 2021 bond referendum, this year's bond referendum this November, are going to include the component where we will begin making sure that all of them are net zero ready or net zero design.
Awesome. And my last question is just about composting. I was excited to see that on the recommendations. I'm hoping as a county that we're going to move more in that direction. Our little neighborhood started this composting service, and it's been awesome. I'm super impressed by people who would not normally consider themselves environmentalists that I see carrying out their coffee grounds and their banana peels. So, I just wanted to ask about that. Is that something you see more as a county centralized program that we would participate in, or as like an arm that would be more like a Get to Green, where that's a component that just gets pulled into it?
I think more the latter, but also yes. It's a short answer.
So I don't know if Allison Coolhean has any additional information. Do you want to add anything to that about composting?
I agree with Mr. Plattenberg, and I would just add that we have, or at least pre-COVID, we had 44 schools who were already composting on site. So this is something that has been happening in FCPS already. I don't know how many of those schools resumed this spring. I'm guessing a lot of them might wait until this fall to start getting back into that again, but it is something that we have already been doing and that I think will continue to expand.
Great, thank you. So Ms. Cohen, I think we took care of your question. Ms. Dernak Kofax.
Hi, yes. Thank you for this excellent presentation. I do appreciate it. I am concerned about the bike routes and what has been talked about that. In the recommendation number 12 talks about expanding and promoting programs that incentivize biking and walking to school. I can say for my area, and I also will speak for some of Ms. Corbett Sanders' area, there are no safe ways to ride a bike to school. And I am curious as to, I know there have been lots of talk over the past 10 years, not lots of action, and just curious about what the conversation has been there with the county.
Well, that's a great question, Ms. Dernak Kofax, because as you mentioned, a lot of our communities were designed with that rural urban kind of look, and the tiebacks are basically ditches on the side of the roads, and having, for being such a densely populated area in Fairfax County, to be able to provide that. But there are bike pathways within Fairfax County and across this county. And the county has done a good job to provide maps where those are for bike routes. The idea of expanding it really is when we look at revisioning for each of the areas, when we talk about Tyson's, when we talk about any type of program, and we talked about the Dulles Technology Corridor, when there's any revisioning and replanning, it's a part of the comprehensive plan. That's why it's not just us with schools. It is, in a lot of cases, VDOT and FCDOT all working together where they are making improvements, looking at it, not only with that Equity One Fairfax lens, but looking at where can we go ahead and provide the opportunities that are aligned with our goals. Because you mentioned, if we don't start planning, when we go and make improvements, we won't be able to look at ways to accommodate biking in the future. That's why some of these, when we mention aspirational goals, when you talk about the Mount Vernon area, it's extremely, your region that we talk about, Ms. Karen Corbett Sanders and others, it's challenging at best to see where we can go ahead and provide that immediately. But that's why it takes planning and forward thinking to see how, either in the short or long term, we can go ahead and accommodate the walking and biking paths. That's the intent, because as you say, there's some very pragmatic realities that may not be able to be overcome in the short term or the long term.
Right. And I think for that in particular, it's been a concern of mine for quite a while, particularly in our area. Bike paths were added, but the speed limit was not lowered. You have to be, I will say there have been 3 deaths, and one recently on the bike path lanes, kind of where, and during my tenure on the board, 3 total and 1 recently. Not school children. There was 2 were school age children, but one was not a death. So it is significant. I've been talking to highway safety. I've been talking to a lot of people, but it seems that this continues to get stalled. So Jeff, I really think if this is going to be I get aspirational, but this would be a great addition on so many ways and levels if we can really make the community understand if we are going to do this, there are so many levels that have to be conquered, if you will, in order for this to be a reality, because it is adding bike path lanes to I'll just tell you, Franconia Road, where people typically go 50 miles an hour. There's not one sane mother that would let their child drive their bike to school, to Mark Twain Middle School or to Edison High School, and they don't. And we've talked about this for quite a while. So I am hopeful that we can find a path forward on some of those kinds of issues, because that's extremely important. And I do want to mention, maybe I misunderstood. I know I saw here that we could have, there could be additional parking spots for green cars. But as Ms. Corbett Sanders stated, I do think that there's an equity issue there. I don't know if that was going to be a less cost or a free cost. I didn't quite understand that, because I unfortunately didn't read the lengthy report. So could you expand on that a bit?
Well, I'll certainly open it up to any other members of the committee and to address it further. But as I said, some of these are aspirational. I mean, the reality is when you take a look at concerns about equity, when you bring those voices into the room that say, we need to make sure that we're equitable, that if we provide it at school A and it seems to be not an issue, students can do that, we provide power and so on. We need to be able to provide it at school B that may be less fortunate or not able to, or what have you. We need to find ways to level the playing field. And that's one thing that, we as a community and as a school system have been extremely focused on with Lisa Williams and the work that she's done with our staff and everything, is always making sure that we have that equity focus. So I know there's not a planned path forward for either one of those, but your points are germane and spot on about the importance of not doing something just to do it, but to do it and to do it right. And that was the reason why I'm so bullish about the JET in its comprehensive approach. By having all of the stakeholders involved in the conversation, it's making sure that those voices are able to be raised up and represented where they haven't been in the past.
All right, thank you.
So one thing I wanted to mention just from the student and school engagement perspective is that the design of the Get to Green program, where we're looking for student engagement in sustainability projects that are important to them, is, we're partnered with the National Wildlife Federation Eco Schools program, which has 12 different pathways. And one of them being transportation, where you might look at bike and walk to school options. Others are around waste management, learning about your watersheds, et cetera, et cetera. And we're very cognizant of the fact that no school can work on all 12 of them for exactly the kinds of things that you're talking about. There are some schools where it would be dangerous to, have kids biking to school. So then those schools have, 11 other options of things that they would do that are important and workable for their community. So, from that overall student environmental stewardship perspective, we're definitely cognizant of that. I see Mr. Frisch has his hand up, and he specifically worked on our transportation goals. So I don't know if you want to add something, Mr. Frisch, to.
Yeah, I'll keep it very quick and just address the parking question. I think parking generally, and this is something that came up in our subcommittee conversations, is loaded with all sorts of equity questions for staff and for students. That said, one of the things that the subcommittee felt strongly about encouraging was, the ability for folks who have more fuel efficient vehicles to have parking or to somehow encourage the adoption there. I would note that led by students, Delegate David Bulova passed legislation a few General Assemblies ago that would allow schools to house charging infrastructure for vehicles. And that was something that students led him to do, and that has not yet been adopted on any of our campuses. This is simply for consideration. And as was said in the presentation, all of these things need to be taken into consideration through the One Fairfax lens to see if they even make sense.
Thank you. Ms. Karen Keys-Gamarra.
Thank you. I'll be really brief. I wanted to respond to a comment that my colleague, Ms. Sterner Koufax, made with respect to the biking paths, and mentioned that, as I recall, the biking path is actually part of the comprehensive plan for the county. However, I'm not sure that they have direction from us as to where priorities might be. So I just wanted to submit to my colleagues that perhaps we want to think about having specific lobbying with our county board of supervisors as we do with our state legislature and others, to say these are our priorities for safety reasons. And so I just wanted to say it's already a part. Dear Lord, I don't know how they know to call me. So I'm just wondering if we want to think about expanding some of the way that we lobby and including the county, so that we're not just talking to them about, going with our budget and the other things that we've done in the past, but literally saying these are some of the concerns that have arisen. We've got safety concerns in the Lee district. We've got safety concerns in the Mount Vernon district. And as you're thinking about implementing the comprehensive plan, can these things be a priority? Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Jeff if he had a comment for that.
Okay.
No, I totally agree. It is a part of the comprehensive plan. It is something that is included, the walking and biking trails. I mean, even in Tyson's, that was one of the components of the refreshment in the area, and some of those objectives couldn't be met. So it's definitely something we can further that conversation. I know it's an interest. How to get there, again, with many of these things is going to be the challenge and the realities, the stark realities of how comprehensive, to what extent, looking at even the baselines. We start with the conceptualization. That's why I say conceptualization to operationalizing, because when you conceptualize, you dream, and you dream big. And yet the JET goals are the right dreams, the right big dreams. The timelines, if you don't set a roadmap, you won't ever get there. And if we set the roadmap, we might have to adjust it along the way, some advanced and some delayed, but it's moving forward all the while. And that's why having a comprehensive group like JET come together, and really Matthew Bechtel, Richard Domer, John Lord, Ali Cohane, the work that they have done and Joey and Francine from transportation has been amazing. But the JET, having the student voices in there and the members of the community, Susan Stillman, and she's been a friend for a long time. Having everybody working together and coming up with a document that we can actually start to figure out pathways forward, even with the challenges that have been brought up here, even with looking at it through the One Fairfax lens, even looking at the financing from Lee and Joe Monduro, Mr. Smith. And I know Mr. Smith and Joe Monduro got immediately on it. Once this was approved and came out of the committee, they got together and talked about, okay, where can we go ahead and start working on this? What can we do? It's that type of leadership at their level that requires us then taking a step back and seeing what we can attain and what we can't, and then reporting about it. Because working together, I believe we can eradicate all obstacles. But yes, to Ms. Keys-Gamarra's question, it is something that is in the comprehensive plan. They are important. I think having further conversation, perhaps through the Planning Commission Subcommittee of Schools, or the liaison of the schools subcommittee planning commissioner to the planning commission might be a good way to advocate.
Okay, I am not seeing other board member hands. So what I may do at this point is turn it over to Mr. Frisch to kind of close this out. Maybe Mr. Plattenberg did a nice job with that.
We get our turns as well.
Set of comments to kind of close out and have us think about what we need to do moving forward for the future. So Mr. Frisch, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, I'd be remiss, Ms. Tolan, if I didn't note that you and I both get turns as well before we
there you go.
close things up. So I'm going to go ahead and take my turn, I guess, unless somebody else has their hand up. On the subject of bikes and walking and multimodal, Jeff and/or our transportation folks, can you speak to the fortuitous timing here? The county is currently engaged in updating the strategic plan, which is, great timing when you consider where we are as a county working together. So when we do have questions about safety and how do you connect areas that are not currently connected, if at all? This is the perfect time to be working together with the county because they're in the midst of a massive overhaul of the, it was called the bike plan before, but now we're thinking of it as multimodal, trails, bikes, walking, et cetera. Can you speak to that, Jeff?
Yes, Mr. Frisch. What's amazing about it is that in any conversation, I know there's some revision that's been going in a number of your magisterial districts. And when we're brought into the table with county staff, we're working directly with the FC DOT folks and the VDOT folks about how can we go ahead and accommodate providing multimodal pathways. And they are looking at the safety. And they have learned about some of the experiences about, for example, speed limits. It seems like, from our perspective, from mine at least, it seems like an obvious perspective that you can't just provide a bike lane on 66 and expect it to be Interstate 66 or something with really fast speedways and expect it to be a safe environment. So it's really taking a look at all of these things and seeing where we can achieve them. And it has been as a part of the design review. So in the piece that Ms. Karen Keys-Gamarra spoke of is being a former planning commissioner, she knows well that in the comprehensive master plan, there are some things that there are items that are called out to be looked for. And when developers come in to develop certain things like parks, libraries, and when we look at multimodal pathways, schools, they are components that they have to be addressed as a part of the design review submission to be in accordance with the comprehensive master plan as amended. So I don't know if that totally addresses some of the comments that you wanted, Mr. Frisch, but I do know that we have taken a look at it. Yep. Any revisioning I've been a part of, that is one key component. And I know in the Mason district, when they were looking at a revision initiative that's been underway for quite some time, the plans that I saw of roadways were totally different than what they are right now. And it was to accommodate all of the things that were mentioned to provide safer pathways for multimodal.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Mr. Lord, if you don't mind, a leading question. Mr. Lord, as was indicated in the presentation, we have reduced our energy usage by about 30% over the last decade or so. Can you tell my board colleagues and me how much that has saved the school division each year, and how that money is put to other uses within the division to help our students succeed?
Yeah, absolutely. Just this last fiscal year alone, we're going to have a reduction of about $12 million in energy use, which is an unusual.
I didn't catch that. Can you say that again?
$12 million.
Okay.
And since the inception of the program that we started back in 2014, there's been a savings of over $50 million. And so where that money goes, there's lots of places you can put $50 million. And the way I always tell people, because I'm really not privy to some of those decisions, is you can reinvest it in what the school system's main purpose is, which is educating children. And so where the school board and where senior staff decide to put it, I don't always know that answer, but I know it's being reinvested in investing the future of education.
And my understanding is that most of it is going towards that purpose, while a little piece of it is being reinvested in our efforts around sustainability, but most of it's going into educational programming. And that's like $8 million a year. I can imagine when these decisions were made before you or I were with FCPS, that many people had the same considerations about making these changes around energy use, that it might cost a lot of money, but look at the savings we're yielding. And I would then pivot to talk about net zero a little bit and our buses, right? Technology is going to improve. Things will continue to get cheaper and more cost effective. So you've got like this bell curve of where things kind of ramp up in cost and then they plateau and then they come right back down. And all of these individual programs that we're talking about, at least when it comes to transportation, energy use, and net zero design and ready, all have the ability to reap financial reward for the school division so that we have additional funds to invest in our students. I encourage my colleagues to read the report. I believe it's on board docs about net zero school construction, because it talks about how there's a financial imperative around the work, that these things pay for themselves eventually and then end up saving us money. And I don't have to say that there are many intangibles that we never consider when we're talking about these things, whether it's the health of the children who are on the buses or in the environment, whether it's how many days out sick they're no longer going to be calling in, whether it's what do you do, if a school building is energy independent and capable of running without a connection to the grid for a day because it's got reserve power, these kinds of things that you might consider. It doesn't have to close when there's a power outage, so you get that extra day of in-person instruction. There's so many tangential benefits. Perhaps anybody on staff could speak to benefits to our work that we've seen thus far that they weren't necessarily expecting.
The only thing I can add, Mr. Frisch, is that you're spot on with your comments, really, and I could go on and on. I always looked at it as the energy cost avoidance that we had, we should reinvest back into facilities. But I know that's not our mission, and I know you hear me cry that battle cry because of how far behind we are. And the challenge is the balance. Mr. Frisch mentions about the short-term or the sticker shock investment, but the long-term paybacks. So those are the conversations. That's why we did the net zero energy study. That's why we have it in our design to look if it's financially advisable in the future. We've got a 37-year average renovation cycle, $180 million a year. We need over $220 million a year annually in order for us to achieve what we need to be doing to begin with. Okay, well, people hear that and they get so mesmerized, they don't think along the lines of what Mr. Frisch just mentioned. So looking at that holistically, making sure that we're doing the best that we possibly can with the resources we're provided is the goal. And it's also the reality of how we're going to operationalize it beginning the 2021 school year. Well, and those ancillary effects are massive. The unintended consequences, if you look at the Get to Green program, and Ms. Tolan can speak to that as well as Ms. Colhane and the rest of the team, when that started out, those seeds that were planted, and I call them karma seeds, because that karma was passed on and on and on. We have a program that is so significant and such a game changer in the lives of our students, because the student-led, the relationship with the National Wildlife Federation, the partnership, it's recognized internationally. In fact, I've even spoken to it internationally. So the unintended consequences of these things are not only good for us now and good for our investment now and our communities now, but they're absolutely necessary for our communities of the future. Sorry, Mr. Frisch, you got me motivated.
Yeah, my final comment is about our buses. And I feel like perhaps the conversation around Montgomery County was kind of glossed over, and people may not have heard how big a friggin' deal that is. One of the biggest impediments to transitioning to an electric or non-carbon emitting vehicle fleet has been the cost and the technology, right? And so the technology is getting better and better every year, but the cost is expensive but coming down. And Montgomery appears to have found a way to partner with the company and for the financing to where they are not experiencing an increase in cost as they transition their entire fleet. That is a friggin' game changer.
It is. And I spoke with Todd Watkins, the Director of Transportation, personally. And the fact that they have bus depots, which we've got 3 garages, but we don't have bus depoting for all of our fleet, really gives them some opportunities that we don't have. But still, the fact that he was able to identify and work with the individual leasing company to make the math work. If we can make the math equations work through other investments, we can make it happen. And by being creative, by having the finance people involved with the transportation people, involved with the vendors, involved with our community, that's how they're making it work. And he's nervous. But Todd Watkins, I can tell you from knowing him for years, does not recommend any investment for board authorization unless he thinks he can deliver. And we're looking at that. We're watching that. We do have the documents. We do know there's some nuances in Maryland that are different than Virginia. And I can tell you that Joey and Francine are doing a great job. We've even brought in other vendors other than the one that they're working with to take a look at, to conceptualize. And we have an RFI, request for information, that we've prepared, that procurement has, to go out on the street so we can go ahead and bring in groups that can give us ideas and help us as we navigate down that path. Anyway, thank you, Mr. Frisch, for mentioning that.
My last comment is simply that when we are halfway done with this work, our view of the technology and the costs associated with the technology is going to be wildly different than it is today, because things are moving so quickly. It really will become one of those things where our work builds on itself very quickly as we approach the goal. So I have appreciated all the comments from my colleagues today and their questions. I know that there are a few people that want to speak and have a go back. So I will finish up there and then we'll pick it up on the other end.
So, Mr. Frisch, I may jump in and just answer that question that you had about some of the benefits to some of this work that maybe wasn't expected. I actually just put a note out to our colleagues. There's a new book out called Schools That Heal, which I think is particularly good timing, talking about things being fortuitous. As we're looking at moving out of the pandemic and bringing our children back into our schools and our outdoor spaces. This new book that came out does have a chapter on Marshall High School and talks a little bit about the renovation there and, the improvements in indoor air quality, the sustainable practices that were put into place, and how that just made, the building much more hospitable for students and teachers. And, there's a lot of national research on teacher retention, student engagement around, those types of things. And then also just using the outdoor spaces and getting students and teachers out into those spaces and having that student engagement and the student pride in the work that they're doing around environmental stewardship. We've seen so many positive things happening across the entire district around that. more than I think I may have expected. So it looks like Ms. Maish has her hand up, and since she hasn't spoken yet, let's start with her, and then next we'll have Karen Corbett-Sanders.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Tolan, Mr. Frisch, for your efforts on this, and of course to all our staff, Mr. Plattenberg, and everyone else who joined. I think a number of the things mentioned just now lend themselves well to a question I wanted to ask about. For one, I should also note, I appreciate the equity focus, of course, as always, the prioritization of One Fairfax in how we look at it. And I would, venture to say that hopefully not just an equity lens, but also thinking of climate justice as an essential component within that equity piece, right? That the entity that is our Earth is another one of the many stakeholders in that One Fairfax project. But in any case, I wanted to ask, I know that in the past we have found ways to actually employ or involve students to learn a little bit more about, the work that's gone on, to engage them in it. So I was just curious to see if in a number of the opportunities here in the grid, if we're thinking about that. I know that didn't continue for some reason at some point, but perhaps if that might be possible.
Mr. Lord, do you have any comments?
Or perhaps Matt. Go ahead, John.
The idea of employing students in the efforts is definitely part of our energy education program. The idea is to have people who can work with schools and to work with students and to integrate best practices into the schools. One of the things we actually talked about internally was the idea of having an energy education team champions program, which would be something similar to what I know the Get to Green program would very much like to see, where we have local champions, local advocates who aren't just doing this out of the goodness of their hearts and doing it because they volunteer, that's what they believe in, but that we provide them a stipend similar to like a coaching stipend, where they would then be the local champion, and to have the idea of not just doing it because they love it, but doing it because the school system has kind of put their money where the mouth is, for lack of a better word. And I think it's really nice idea. And the idea is in place with our energy education specialists, with the Good to Green program, and with so many volunteers all around the school division. But implementing it in a more institutional way is something that could be a really great outcome from this program.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, it's definitely great to hear that certain components of it exist. I think as we look ahead in implementing this, I hope that we can consider additional ways of incorporating it. Yeah, thank you. It's because it's our education goals too, right? It meets a lot of different goals at the same time. So thank you.
Matt, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that from the student engagement.
So yeah, we can add to that. So for student engagement, we have, as we mentioned earlier, we've created a toolkit, a green career toolkit that can be used in all of our high schools to support the college and career specialists and our school counselors and helping students find opportunities that were created through this work, through JET. Some of the contacts that were given to me to provide for like guest speaker experiences, so that students are getting to hear directly from the professionals that live and breathe the work, learn about the qualifications that they may need to, the skills, how those are transferable skills, are soft skills that are necessary for the workforce, this in-demand workforce, as we start to develop these students to be ready for that workforce. And then ultimately just looking at ways that we can, work with the different companies that support us through this work, or even just within our own county. So Office of Facilities Management, there's the opportunity that we have our apprenticeship program there, where it could be expanded to support additional opportunities like we're seeing hopefully for students. But yeah, there's just a lot that we can continue to explore in the future, but just, starting early, getting students interested in these careers early on is really the biggest push that we've been exploring. And, providing workplace tours, guest speaker experiences, students interested in these opportunities, and they can refine those career interests and start to figure out what would be the next path or that would be essential moving forward. So yeah, there's definitely a lot that we can do in the future, but it's just a matter of seeing what types of new relationships we build with, like I said, the solar installers, for example, or other different, different businesses and organizations that we work with, and try to get them on board and have them see the value of creating a talent pipeline of students that will hopefully go on to pursue opportunities in these green careers in local universities, so that we can then, expand our Back to Fairfax program and bring those students back and support some of these, and work in some of these opportunities that we have within FCPS. So there's a lot of different options we can explore, like I mentioned earlier, but we'll continue moving on.
Thank you. Ms. Karen Carver-Sanders.
Just a very quick question, because we were talking about school buses and bus routes and the challenge of bus routes for electric buses over in my side of the county. One of the questions I have is, have you looked at the efficiency of the overall distances that students are spending on buses? Because we do know that there are certain areas where students are spending 45 minutes each way on a bus. And so that there's an economic cost, and there's a environmental cost, and there's a health cost. Has that been any part of the JET work, or are you planning on looking at that at all?
Well, I can tell you, we do look at that annually as part of our transportation routing process to begin with. And I think it's absolutely necessary that we look at that, because Ms. Corbett-Sanders, you had said that from the inception when we were talking about this grant, and you pointed out that, hey, we've got this infrastructure within the Mount Vernon district where we have charging stations, understanding that they were different than the charging stations for the buses. But the desire is we need that expansion down here. So we've got to look at an infrastructure throughout the county, because we talk about one Fairfax and equitable distribution, that there's a desire, there's the same impetus, the Supervisor Stork serves on the JET, and yet we're unable to get one of those 8 down there just because of the infrastructure and working with Dominion, and because they were providing the charging station. So it's a very good point you make. I don't know specifically, and perhaps Joey, if you might have any knowledge about whether or not the JET is taking a look at any of that as a part of the JET work. But I do know when we look at our routing, we always look at the length of runs, the length of transportation, because we have such a specialized transportation service delivery model where we have AAP programs and we provide transportation for students, and academies where we provide transportation for students that are pretty long distance and outside of a specific area. It does create some challenges, but we look at it annually. And Mr. Wellborn, I don't mean to put you on the spot, Joey, but if you have anything you want to add, now's the time to unmute your computer and make a comment, or you can just say, I don't have anything to add.
No, I mean, we did look at the distance for these routes and place these buses where they would best serve us. But for future purchases, that is something that we're going to have to take into consideration, because currently these do not meet all of our transportation needs. But that is something that we're going to have to devote some time and effort to figure out how we're going to make it work in those areas. But that, unfortunately, that was not one of the goals or recommendations from JET that we looking at. The goal simply was to start getting these buses in and figure out ways to make them work, and then focus on the areas where they won't work kind of down the road.
Thank you, Joey. And Mr. Smith, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Oh, and I was just going to add that I think that as we work with the county, our county partners down the road, as they look at expanding their need for electric vehicles, whether it's buses or sanitation vehicles and a plethora of other vehicles that they would be using, we could certainly and will certainly need to look at expanding that infrastructure across the entire county.
And if it's okay, if I could add 1 or 2 things, having served on the JET committee, I know the county looked at the efficiencies of a electric vehicle powertrain compared to the efficiencies of a diesel powertrain. And frankly, you lose a lot of energy to heat when you are burning it. And so you actually, I don't want to get into the math too deeply, but if you convert everything to British thermal units, you use about 1/3 the amount of energy to move a bus that's powered by electricity than the same bus that's powered by diesel energy. And at that same time, you're not putting the emissions from the tailpipe into the atmosphere at that bus. And another item that I know is important to the jet, if you look at the 14 transportation recommendations, the fifth one is that we would actually require eventually that all of the power used to have an electric bus or any other electric vehicle in that case to be coming from a renewable energy source. So these things were looked at by the jet and they're being looked at by the county. But I think Mr. Wellborn and the county staff, as all of the parties who've looked deeply at it, agree there's advances in technology that need to occur for us to really fully implement the transportation goals.
Thank you, Mr. Lord. At this point in time, I don't see additional board member hands. Just giving you one more chance before I think we're done again. Okay, Mr. Frisch, would you like to give us a sense of what we'll be doing over the next couple of weeks leading up to our meeting on in July? Can't believe it's going to be July.
Yeah.
And close us out.
Absolutely. So first, I want to thank our colleagues for today's conversation. We also heard today that our colleagues on the Board of Supervisors will be voting in July on the adoption of JET's recommendations. So this conversation and our action in July is rather fortuitous. At our July 15th regular meeting, Ms. Tolan and I will bring a motion to adopt these recommendations, commit to annual review of our progress, and move forward with draft changes to policy 8542. Before we conclude this portion of the work session, I want to be clear that these goals are as bold as they are critical to the proper stewardship, not only of our environment and the climate, but also the financial future of the school division. We simply can't afford to delay. And after the July 4th holiday, Ms. Tolan and I will be calling each of you to discuss next steps, answer any further questions, and we definitely look forward to those conversations and moving forward at our July 15th meeting. Thank you all.
Thank you to everyone. It's my understanding, Dr. Anderson, are we starting our next conversations at 6 p.m.? Okay.
We are. So we have a little bit of a break before we start at 6 because we're going straight through until 9.
Okay, so with that, we'll adjourn this portion of the meeting and we will reconvene at 6 p.m. A huge thank you to all of the staff members here with us today. Thank you.